How Wisconsin school districts handle reported misconduct by staff is in the spotlight tonight.
The Capital Times publishing an investigative report saying 200 teacher sexual misconduct and grooming cases were hidden from the public by the Department of Public Instruction. That report says accused teachers resigned to avoid investigation. Now legislators and the DPI are responding to this report. Representative Joel Kitchen saying in part, quote, "The investigation showed an alarming level of sexual misconduct in our schools. Teachers were allowed to resign to avoid an investigation. This is unacceptable. For every teacher they investigated, there are likely many more victims," end quote.
State Superintendent Dr. Jill Underley sent a letter to the Capital Times demanding a correction today. She's also responding to the report saying in part, quote, "Any suggestion that the DPI withholds information from the public is categorically false. Records are released in accordance with open records laws and educator license statuses publicly available to anyone on the DPI website," end quote. Victoria Frazier spoke with an attorney who represents Wisconsin school districts about how these complaints are handled.
Our number one goal at the very outset is to make sure that the environment is protected and that we're not putting additional kids potentially in harm's way.
Attorney Jeffrey Lacey, who practices law out of his office in Green Bay, represents over 200 school districts throughout the state. We asked him about concerns of how sexual misconduct allegations are handled. He says complaints received by schools are investigated with a sense of urgency.
If there's an allegation of sexual misconduct from a teacher involving a student, that teacher would be immediately removed from the environment. But that's why we do it pending investigation in what's a paid administratively, because it's a public entity. When we're talking about public school districts, we have to retain their compensation so that it's non-disciplinary.
Lacey says school district attorneys work parallel with law enforcement during the investigation process. Chapter 48 of Wisconsin statutes requires schools to report information discovered during the investigation to the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction.
After either we've made a determination through an investigation that there's been some form of misconduct that would qualify as immoral conduct, or a resignation is received, essentially to avoid investigation involving a matter that would be immoral conduct.
Lacey says transparency to parents, students, and staff is important, but there is a limited amount of information that can be shared while a complaint is under investigation.
And under the public records law, we can't release anything relative to a pending investigation. Only after it's concluded and a final determination has been made, then that information becomes subject to public release after notification to the individual.
While the Department of Public Instruction determines a teacher's licensure, a school board can proceed with the termination if warranted. Lacey says his firm works closely with schools to teach staff what signs and behaviors to look out for. Reporting in Green Bay, Victoria Frazier, Action 2 News.